I want to thank everybody for coming today. We have a few actually in person, so thank you for coming in person today to the Signs of Suicide Prevention Program training. For everyone that's joining us live, thank you as well. And for those of you that are going to be watching later, I appreciate your time. Today, we're going to be here for about an hour to an hour and a half. My name is Dawn Metter. I'm one of the school psychologists. We also have Dr. Terry Berger, who is another school psychologist here, and also Marissa Hancock. She is our mental health counselor for our children who have an individualized education plan. I want to also thank the Katie Sue Foundation. That is what made this possible. They're the ones that are sponsoring this program, so we want to say a large thank you to them for their support. If you have any questions after the training, you are more than welcome to send an email to all three of us, and we would be more than welcome to answer any of your questions. Again, thanks for your time, and have a great day.
Hi, everybody. Marissa Hancock, like she said, mental health therapist for IEPs. We want to go ahead and acknowledge that that suicide is an immensely personal subject, and that break needs to step out. Feel free to do so at any time. Everyone will have recording, so it will be available also later. We have provided, along with the slide presentation, you should have access to both local and national resources to hand students and just to keep on hand, as well as some other handouts to use for reference, just for quick reference back to some of the things we're going to discuss today. Okay, so our agenda for today is going to be to go over this slide presentation. We're going to cover national statistics, prevention basics, risk factors, warning signs of suicide. We're going to introduce you to ACT or ACT, which is the acronym that we are going to use to help you recall the process of aiding students in distress. We are going to review school protocols, and finally there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So we're going to ask that you save those questions until the end so that we can kind of move through this and keep to our schedule. We will watch the faculty SOS video, which will take approximately 10 minutes, and then we will go over the handouts and just kind of explain them to you. Okay, we know and recognize that you all are not mental health clinicians. You are not being asked or expected to counsel students or to administer therapy to students. We are asking that you acknowledge, care, and tell. This is something that we will expand upon. Actually, I believe Dawn will be expanding on that later in the presentation. We're asking that you do not attempt to counsel students. In fact, faculty and staff are well positioned to be trusted adults, to take notice of changes in student behavior, changes in mood, friendship, grades, to name a few of the possible warning signs. Through casual observation on a daily basis, you're in that position to notice. Being aware of risk factors that will later be covered in detail again by Dawn. Being bullied, students in higher risk groups such as LGBTQ can make all of the difference when identifying earlier a possible student that might be suicidal. Like the slide says, suicide is preventable and we can all help. If a student comes to you in crisis, it's recommended that you listen to what they have to say without judgment. Using a technique known as active listening, this involves focusing on the other person without distractions, asking open-ended questions, so asking questions without a yes or no answer, encouraging them to open up to you and to talk, giving them the time they need to say everything that they want. And sometimes that's not, easy to do when you're in a classroom, right? You may have a lot of other distractions, so it may take some finagling on your part, trying to figure out how you're going to get with this student to have a conversation without interruptions. Okay, so listening to them, at times repeating back to them what you're hearing them say, this is going to help them know that you're listening and that you understand what they're really trying to convey. One of the biggest takeaways from today should be that don't underestimate your power to recognize the signs of suicide. Don't underestimate your power to save a life, possibly. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can make a world of difference to a student. Okay, so there are many ways that faculty and staff can lead the cause to prevent youth suicide. Unfortunately, over the past 20 years, suicide rates have increased and become the second leading cause of death for middle and high school students. During this same time, accidental deaths of youth have dramatically decreased. Take a moment to think about the steps we've taken as a society to prevent accidental automobile deaths. Some examples of these things that we've done are safer cars, safer roads, driver education, and changes in legislation, right? So now take a moment, if you will, and consider some things that we could do to prevent or lower the statistics on suicide. We believe that we can do this by doing such things as raising awareness, demystifying and destigmatizing mental health disorders, providing education, doing what we're doing today, training teachers, staff, parents, students to recognize the signs, how to respond effectively, and always be ready to provide resources, aid, and to know the school protocols. Okay. The slide that you're looking at here is based off statistics from the CDC survey taken from 1999 to 2014. These are actually not accurate anymore. Unfortunately, the numbers are now even higher. In 2017, the percentage per 100,000 people raised nationally from this 8.7 to 10.6. According to the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, Indiana is now currently ranked 25th in suicide statistics in the nation. This again is based off of those same statistics from that 2017 survey that was actually published in 2019. They're about 2 years behind when they publish. Indiana's percentages of deaths by suicide per 100,000 people is 16.36. So what we're looking at here, what they put out in this program is 8.7, but what we're realistically looking at is 16.36. That's a big jump. That's very serious. So as if that's not scary enough, experts are reporting increases across the board this last year due to COVID-19 related stressors. The pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues. I'm sure you all are hearing a lot about that right now, or if not hearing about it, witnessing it. So this means that number, that 16.36, is likely to be continuing to grow right now. So that means this training is more important than ever. We need to pull together as a community here at Silver Creek. We need to put this at the forefront of our concerns for the students we serve, not just in school, but also virtually. Okay. One way that faculty and staff can make a big difference in the lives of our students is by feeling prepared to talk about suicide. Be assured that asking someone about suicide will not put that idea in their head. I think a lot of people, and we know from talking to people, that they're afraid that talking about it is going to make them think it if they're not already. That is not the case. Statistics does not support that. Evidence does not support that. In fact, it's the opposite. Talking about it helps them to open up about the pain they're experiencing, and opening up about this pain that they're experiencing and connecting with someone does the exact opposite. It helps them to feel like they're less likely to commit suicide, if anything. So we want to dispel that myth that talking about suicide is going to make you or make the student feel like they're going to commit it. Okay, so you are their lifeline. If you are concerned that a student might be thinking about suicide, you can ask indirectly or directly if they have thought about currently considering committing suicide. The most important thing is that the questions are asked. There are a few examples on the screen of possible ways to ask. This will be a difficult conversation, no matter which way you cut it. It's very important that you find someone who can ask if you can't. So not everybody's going to be comfortable doing this. Honestly, I don't know that anybody is comfortable doing it. We want to recognize that. I'm a trained mental health professional. I've been doing it for a very long time now, and it's still very scary. okay? But we have to ask. You have to open that door. You have to put yourself out there for these students. And we're not asking you to respond and to do therapy again. We're asking you just to ask the questions so that we can get the answers, so that we can refer them on to the people who can counsel and who can do therapy with them. Excuse me. The simple act of making sure that it gets done, whether it's you or somebody else, is you doing your part. It doesn't have to be you, as long as you get them to someone who can, okay? There are many factors that could lead to suicidal thoughts and attempts. Like the slide says, it's never about just one thing. We know that ages 15 to 24 are at an increased risk. Students struggling with mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression, as well as substance abuse disorders, represent a higher risk group, even more so if these disorders go untreated. Those students who struggle with gender, identity, and sexuality are also a high-risk group. Having a family history of suicide, experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, suffering from a severe or chronic illness, being bullied, loneliness. There are many situational reasons why people may consider suicide, such as loss of a loved one, experiencing a traumatic event, end of a relationship, parents divorcing, and many, many more things that could happen in the course of one's life. One big risk factor to note is having access to firearms. Suicide crises are often attributed to short-term or temporary life problems, but having access to a gun makes it easier to carry out the act in an instant. Many people keep unlocked guns in their homes, making them easy to get, quick and deadly for any young person. It's easy to believe that you have taught children gun safety, but children's underdeveloped frontal lobes make them impulsive and likely to act without thinking. So their very age and their very level of brain development makes them likely to make a dangerous choice. Educate those around you the importance of keeping firearms locked safely. Never assume that you know a student is okay or that you can't help. Many of these reasons a person may feel suicidal would not be evident. You can't just look at someone and see that they're feeling depressed or anxious. I think we all know from working with kids that anxiety and depression can present in different ways. I think the world thinks that depression looks like somebody who's sad, but in children it may look like somebody who's acting out, right? Somebody who's angry, somebody who is yelling at the students around them or even bullying other students. All of these things are signs that they're experiencing inner turmoil. So just remember that all the reasons listed can be helped with treatment, that can be helped with attention, and suicide is, again, preventable, okay? So with this, I'm going to hand the next slide over to Dawn. She's going to go over in greater detail the warning signs, protective factors, the acronym, and the protocols of the school.
Before I do that, we're actually going to watch our video before I get into those.
Welcome, and thank you for your commitment to championing youth suicide prevention efforts in your school and community. The goal of this video is to introduce you to the SOS Signs of Suicide Prevention program. As you know, the adolescent years can be difficult and stressful. The SOS program is designed to teach both students and adults the difference between normal development and what may be a more serious mental health issue. We are reaching out to you, a trusted adult in your school and community, to give you an overview of what this program aims to do, as well as assist you in recognizing the signs of depression and suicide, and how to respond effectively to students. The seriousness of this issue in schools becomes clear when you look at the facts.
People have to understand that thinking about suicide or feeling suicidal is an indication that there is an underlying illness. That illness is usually depression, which is treatable.
You can recognize depression because it's a change in the teen's normal behavior. So for a teen who used to enjoy certain activities, if that teen no longer enjoys those activities or decides to withdraw, that can be an indicator. But mostly you're looking for change and symptoms that persist for 2 weeks or longer.
More than 90% of youth who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental disorder, most likely depression and/or substance abuse, which are treatable. Alarmingly, 80% of youth with mental illness are not identified or receiving services. Most people are uncomfortable with the topic of suicide. As a result, there is a tendency for people to avoid communicating openly about this preventable issue. But it's time to start talking about it. Half of all mental health disorders start by the age of 14.
What's great about the SOS program is that it champions the youth suicide prevention efforts. It's a universal approach, and it offers students a depression checkup and also the necessary tools that they need to seek help.
Our goal is to help students recognize signs of depression and suicide, along with appropriate steps to get help. The purpose of this program is not to tell whether students are depressed, but rather inform them about whether they or their friends may have symptoms that need further evaluation. Through the SOS program, school staff, students, and parents will learn about depression, suicide, and related risk factors with emphasis on a simple help-seeking acronym: ACT. Acknowledge that your friend has a problem. Express that you care. Tell a trusted adult.
I couldn't even get out of bed. I just felt so hopeless.
One of the main benefits of the SOS program is that it gives you a comprehensive understanding of the warning signs of depression and suicide. These warning signs are more prevalent than you might think.
The most important warning signs that a student needs help is something that might be different. Is the student having trouble eating or sleeping? Or are they irritable or moody? Or are they happy one day and sad the next? It's really important to look at what's different and what might be changing in their lives that's not normal.
It's pretty typical when students come into the office and talk about their depression that they'll say things like they are not sleeping the way that they used to, their appetite has changed, they're not interested in the same things anymore.
The factors and warning signs that we see with students who are more at risk of suicide or depression include a history of abuse, use of drugs and alcohol, a history of mental illness, changes in behavior, changes in affect, and involvement with the law.
Other factors that we look for in regards to some warning signs is isolation, impulsive aggressive behavior, previous suicide attempts, access to lethal weapons, for example, guns, or even exposure to suicidal behaviors in others.
Another factor that we look for is family history. A youth can be more at risk if they've had another member of their family deal with depression or any other kind of mental illness. We also look for a teen who has dealt with loss. Any significant loss can put them at risk as well.
One particular group that I'm concerned with that's at high risk of suicide is students who are struggling with their sexual orientation, whether they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning. Students that are concerned with this have this fear of being rejected by their family and friends and their community.
I had so many people looking out for me. It just took me a while to realize it.
Some students have a vast support network, while others don't. Think about the people you turn to when you're feeling down. It's common for all of us to want to rely on the people we trust. Support is one of the major elements in what we call protective factors. Students who have a number of protective factors in their lives are less likely to consider suicide.
One of the leading risk factors for suicide is untreated depression. So if you are a young person who's not getting treated, you have more of a likelihood of going to these extreme measures to deal with the pain that you may be feeling. That's why it's so important and it's so crucial for people to get treatment. It can be a mixture of talk therapy, medication, alternative methods, but it's very important to get these issues addressed.
When students participate in the SOS program, they view an educational DVD followed by group discussion. The aim is to create a supportive and responsive atmosphere to recognize the warning signs for those youth who may be at risk and how to seek help.
The ACT message is an incredibly powerful acronym. The SOS program teaches students the letters ACT, acknowledge, care, and tell. Acknowledging that a student or a friend is suffering from either depression or showing signs of suicide is the very first step.
The C stands for care. Let your friend know that you do truly care about them. And the T is to tell a trusted adult. And it's okay to tell a trusted adult, even if your friend gets upset, because it's better to, save a life in any situation. You can't own these problems. You can't fix these problems. You need to get professionals more involved.
So these 3 letters are so important, and it's such a great method to just bring into the classroom and help students really understand what it is they're supposed to do.
I didn't know how to help myself. What I really wanted was just someone to listen to me.
After students view the video and participate in a classroom discussion, they may fill out a screening form. This screening does not diagnose depression, but indicates the presence or absence of symptoms. Symptoms consistent with suicide or depression. Regardless of whether your school uses the screening form, all students will be given the opportunity to indicate whether they would like to speak with someone following the program, either about themselves or a friend. It's important that all school staff know how to respond to students who request help or are exhibiting warning signs.
If a student has disclosed the need for help to a school staff member, that staff member should not leave the student alone. They should make sure to listen and be open and allow the student to feel comfortable with sharing their feelings. And they should definitely avoid making the student feel embarrassed or ashamed about how they feel.
Offering encouragement to a student who is depressed or showing signs of suicide is incredibly important. A lot of times we are the only person that might be encouraging them, might be supporting them, offering them help. And for confidentiality, a student that is showing signs of suicide, their safety comes first. So we can never promise confidentiality to a student. Every school district has its own protocol around crisis. So knowing what that protocol is incredibly important for any professional in the building to know.
Okay, so next part we're going to talk about is kind of a case study. We're going to look and see if Taylor was one of our students. We're going to take a little bit of what you have seen in the video, and we are going to kind of apply it. So I really want you to think about maybe a student you have in your class that may be similar to our fictitious student, Taylor. So what if Taylor was one of our students? I'm going to read you a little bit about Taylor, and then we're going to look and see what risk factors we might see for her. Taylor has always been a good student with a solid group of friends. She has struggled with depression since her mother died 2 years ago, but managed to keep her grades up and stay on the basketball team while also helping take care of her younger siblings. So what risk factors do we see if we're looking at Taylor? If we think back to some of the things that we have learned today, we're really going to see what might put her at risk for increase of any type of mental health issue and or suicidal risk. So the first two that pop out are depression, which is our mental health issues, as well as her mother died. One of the other risk factors was having a family or a loved one pass away. So those really are our risk factors. They're really warning signs of what is going to potentially have a student who needs assistance. So here are some other various risk factors that may increase suicide as well. If we look on the right-hand side, mental health disorders like depression, death of a loved one, trauma, substance use, bullying, and LGBTQ youth. In 2020, in June, it was found that 40% of U.S. adults reported struggling with mental health or substance use. So it's not just our youth that are at risk, but we have to remember about ourselves and about our students' families as well. That also puts them at risk. Their families may be struggling with some of the same issues. So we really have to be cognizant of that as well. Between 2009 and 2017, depression among kids 14 to 17 increased more than 60%. If we really think about what's happening in our world, we have a ton more risk factors than what we had even last year. So these are things that I know that we have a lot on our plate as teachers and as educators, but these are things that are barriers to learning. So these risk factors are important for us to be mindful of. In 2017, it was found that 1 in 8 Americans aged 12 to 25 experienced a major depressive episode. A lot of those go untreated. Right now, I know our mental health facilities are very overloaded. If we make a referral, a lot of times those children are put on waiting lists for months. So it's very important that we know what our resources are here in our buildings, and we'll talk about that too today, as well as within our community. When we look at trauma, trauma is pretty huge. Any type of abuse or neglect puts our students at risk. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys self-harm. That's pretty huge. So think about your classroom that you're teaching, and you have multiple students that are sitting in front of you who are probably self-harming themselves, and that includes males. We sometimes think of that as only a female issue, but it's both. It affects both males and females. When we look at bullying, also 1 in 5 students reported being bullied. That equates to 5 million youth annually in the U.S. That's a whole lot of kids who are feeling like they are at risk or a target. Bullied teens are 2 times more likely to attempt suicide, and one of our most vulnerable youth to bullying is our LGBTQ youth. Suicide, of course, just like Marissa said, is the second leading cause of death, and for our queer or LGBTQ youth, they are at higher risk, much higher risk than their straight or cisgender youth. So this is a population that we need to be mindful of too. Just one more statistic for those population is for transgender and our non-binary youth, having their identity and pronouns respected by all or most was associated with a greatly reduced risk of suicide attempt. Just by honoring those usage of pronouns can greatly reduce the risk of suicide. But an even more shocking statistic is only 20% of trans and non-binary youth reported that people respected their pronoun usage. So it's something as educators we need to be mindful of, some of those risk factors. So when we look at those, we want to make sure that we're mindful of mental health. If a student has had a loss in their family, if they've had trauma, any type of substance use too. If a student comes to school and you know that they have been using drugs, that is another risk factor, bullying, and of course our LGBTQ youth. So here we're going to look at some warning signs, and the warning signs are those clues. So we have our risk factors that we be mindful of, but here is our warning signs. So these are the things that we are going to see usually in a classroom or hear other students talking about. So it's clues that someone may be thinking about suicide. So over the past month, Taylor's friends say she never wants to meet them at the park anymore for pickup basketball, saying things like, "What's the point?" And none of that matters. Yesterday, her friends were shocked when she blew up and yelled at them to leave her alone. Today, Taylor's first period together caught her drinking alcohol from her water bottle. So let's look and see what some of the warning signs are. If the warning signs are clues, let's find some clues in some of the things that you might be hearing in a classroom from Taylor's friends or from Taylor herself. So what are some clues? She doesn't want to do things that she normally used to love. She's kind of given up. What's the point? Also, she blew up and yelled at them. If you remember Taylor from the first slide, that wasn't like her at all. So there's things that are out of the ordinary. And also she's drinking alcohol, which she hasn't done before. So let's look at some other indications that someone may be thinking about suicide. So there's really 3 things that we're talking about. It's things that someone might talk about, their feelings they may be expressing, and it's also changes in behavior. So there's really 3 things as an educator that you can kind of be mindful of. So you have your risk factors that you have in your mind, but the warning signs that you're looking at are really 3 different things. What are they talking about? What feelings are they projecting? And what are their changes in behavior? Those are the things that you can pick up as an educator in your classroom. So if we look to the right-hand side, sudden changes in behavior, irritability or anger that's out of context, talking about suicide or sounding hopeless. A lot of times teens will talk about guilt or shame sometimes too. If you see their grades dropping, if you have a student who's been a really good student and their grades are dropping, that can be a huge warning sign, especially when they say, what's the point? It doesn't matter. A lot of times we have students who are struggling with e-learning. They may have been an A/B student, now they're really struggling, now they're a D or an F student. Those are warning signs, especially if those come with a lot of guilt or shame because of that. Sometimes they might talk about being a burden to others. Some of the feelings they might express is hopelessness, like they're trapped, having no reason to live, being sad. Sometimes it could be even physical pain. So if you have students who are absent a lot, asking those questions are very, very important, especially if they're always saying they don't feel good. When they have those somatic complaints, those are also some warning signs for us, particularly if they're a student who don't usually take and complain about physical symptoms. Some changes in behavior can be making a plan, researching ways to die, withdrawing from friends, saying goodbye, giving away important things, even risk-taking behavior, eating or sleeping less, mood swings, or also drug and alcohol use like we've talked about. Ms. Hancock also talked about some precipitating factors like stressful events that can trigger some of these warning signs that you might see, particularly if you have a teen that's had a really hard breakup. As adults, we're like, oh, they've just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. They think the world's ending. Well, to them, it might be. So we really need to make sure that we are being mindful and asking those teens those questions, because if we see their behavior changing. So again, we're looking at what are they talking about, what feelings are they projecting, and what changes in behavior are they having. If we see those 3 things, then those are warning signs that we need to act. We need to acknowledge that with the student. We need to tell them that we care and we acknowledge that, and then we need to do the appropriate steps to tell. The great news and the great thing is we also need to remember what our protective factors are. And protective factors are those personal or environmental characteristics that help protect people from suicide. So even though we may have a lot of risk factors and we may have some warning signs we're looking for, these are things that we can control. So we don't have a lot of control over the risk factors of a student or the warning signs of a student, but we do have some control over the protective factors. So let's look at Taylor. Taylor has always been a good student with a solid group of friends. She has struggled with depression since her mother died 2 years ago, but managed to keep her grades up and stay on the basketball team while also helping take care of other younger siblings. So let's look and see what those protective factors are. Again, those are the characteristics that help protect people from suicide. So we look here, we say, who does Taylor have support from? Well, she has a solid group of peers. That's really important when we're talking about protective factors. Do they feel connected? Do they have peers that they care about and that care about them? Also, she managed to keep her grades up. That's a good protective factor. We also want to look at how she is with connectedness, how is her ability to cope, as well as access to mental health care. We really want to make sure that if a student has the ability to cope, they have good, what we call emotional intelligence. They're connected to individuals, family, peer groups. She might have good problem-solving skills, a positive self-image. She might even have a very strong spirituality or faith. Access to mental health care is huge. What we talked about before, a lot of our students, when we take and refer out to other places, to families, they may hit a barrier, which means they might have waiting lists to be able to get appropriate mental health care. And that's where we as a school system can come in and really be that trusted adult. You also have school counselors who are very important to those students of making relationships with them. All right, so school is actually a key protective factor. Actually, the strongest protective factor against being a target of bullying is positive peer interaction. So those statistics I mentioned earlier about bullying increasing the risk of suicide, one of the strongest factors we can have is positive peer interaction. So we really need to foster that in our environments of connectedness to each other, of acceptance as well, to really foster those relationships. A positive school climate is also associated with lower rates of bullying. So when we look at school connectedness, it's really a belief that adults and peers care about their learning and about them as individuals. There's something that you can do with a student if you are concerned. It's something called a 2x10. That means for 10 days in a row, for 2 minutes, you give that student your time. And it doesn't have to be anything special or anything important other than having a conversation. And it can start off with, hey, I noticed X, Y, and Z. What's going on? It could also just be, hey, did you catch the basketball game last night? It's just connecting and building relationships. It's helping that student feel like they're valued and that you also care about them. All faculty and staff contribute to whether they feel connected to school to build connections. I'm not for sure why that's kind of like that in our presentation, so I apologize. So hopefully you can see it when you actually get the slides. But we do have a mentor program. I know that since we have COVID, that has been put on hold, but that is huge. So we really need to start thinking outside of the box on if we are continuing with virtual learning, how can we foster connectedness with our students who are virtual when we don't really have eyes on them physically, but it's through a screen? How do we do that? It could just be setting up Zoom sessions to check in with specific students regularly. It could be taking and sending out messages to them that you're available and they can reach out to you. And if you don't hear from a student, you reaching out to them. There's various ways that we can really take and increase our protective factors at school. All right, so how can you build protective factors in students this school year? Well, we can get creative and encourage students to participate in classes, activities, and individual check-ins. We really, again, need to start thinking outside the box of how we might do that and how we might do that more effectively. You guys have done a great job of integrating anytime we've had e-learning or if we've had virtual students. But really, this is where we need to be going and seeing what else can we do and how can we make it easier for students to know that we're available. Also, let students know you can be a trusted adult in their lives, whether in person or virtual. The biggest thing for a student to take and trust you is to feel like you understand them. So if you have connected with them on a more personal level, and it doesn't have to be anything huge. Again, if you use a 2x10 model, it could be talking about the new dog they got, a sport, a musical that they're into. It can be anything just to connect with the student. They will trust you more to be able to confide in you. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before Dr. Berger takes over and talks about, I'm going to introduce ACT. And you need to act to help a student in need. So again, we're looking at what are our risk factors, what are our warning signs, and what are our protective factors. And that's going to lead you to act, which means acknowledge, care, and tell. So you want to acknowledge you are seeing signs of depression and suicide in a student and that it's serious. Again, we're not expecting you to be mental health providers. It's just being a good human being. It's acknowledging that you care for someone and I see this. Hey, listen, I've seen you sitting in the back of the room for the last 2 weeks. You're usually sitting in the front and answering questions. What's up with that? Asking open-ended questions is a very good way to get a student to open up to you. Hey, I've noticed that you're not eating lunch with your peer group anymore. What's going on with that? There might be things that we are unaware of that's going on. Maybe they broke up with someone. Maybe they're having an issue with another peer. Maybe they're being picked on. Maybe their parent is having significant financial difficulty. There's lots of factors, and sometimes that student will surprise you by telling you, and then you can show them you care by just letting them know, wow, I didn't know that was going on. I wish you would have told me. I could have tried to help. I'm glad you confided in me. I'm glad you trust me. Now, what are we going to do about it? Sometimes students will not want to tell other people for fear of shame, for fearing that they might be made fun of, or maybe that they feel like you won't understand. So when they confide in you, that is information that we need to make sure that a student knows that there are sometimes we have to tell someone. So we can do two things. We can either encourage them to come with us to go tell by empowering them to go tell the appropriate people, or let them know that we care for them so much that we can't have confidentiality. We have to tell someone, whether they're a part of it or not, but we want them to be empowered to come with you to tell. And this is something that Dr. Berger is going to go over a little bit more as well.
Good morning. What I want to do just a little bit, Don went over the ACT components with acknowledge, care, and tell. Take this off here, I'm sorry. So what I want to do is just kind of, let's practice a little bit on how that might look in the classroom. If Taylor was in your classroom, sitting in the back of the classroom, what would it look like if you felt like that you needed to reach out and help her? And then we'll talk a little bit about the school policy that Silver Creek has currently, and I know it'll be reviewed a little bit more over the summer too, because this year has been very unusual, so we want to make sure that we have the appropriate policies in place for any situation that comes up educationally. So let's look if this will work. I think I went one too far. Okay, I think Don's going to help me out here and play the role of Taylor in this little scenario. But we're just going to kind of pretend that we're having a conversation with Taylor. So I'll be the teacher, she'll be Taylor, and then we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like. So what we want to do is look for those signs of acknowledge and care. And in this video, acknowledge is in the blue, and anything that's in yellow is showing an example of what you could use to show the student that you care. So, Taylor, it seems like that you're dealing with some major struggles. You aren't participating in class like you used to.
I'm fine, and I don't feel like talking to you.
I understand that you don't feel like talking to me, but your friends say that you aren't talking to them either. I care about you, so I'm going to keep trying.
I said I'm fine.
Drinking at school is not something that people do who are fine, Taylor. You can talk to me, and you know that.
Oh. Okay, my life sucks. It's not fair. But you don't need to worry because I won't be around much longer.
Taylor, when people say things like that, it means that they're sometimes it means that they're thinking about ending their life. Have you thought about suicide?
Oh my gosh, don't freak out. I was just joking.
Don't worry, Taylor. I'm not freaked out, but it does seem like you're really hurting, and I know that things can get better. We have people at school who know how to help kids that are dealing with the big issues like this, and we would really like to help you.
Help how?
We have mental health support staff here that can help you. You know your counselors, you have good relationships with them. They'll know how to help you and help you get the help that you need. Let's go see him or her now.
I don't want to talk to anyone else. I'm just going to get in more trouble. Can't we just drop this?
No, I can't drop it. Your safety's too important to me. Let's walk down to the counseling suite. They'll help us figure out what to do next. Okay. So when we're talking about those, what are some other ideas, that we could have done with Taylor? It's a very personal conversation because students react differently to every teacher and every counselor, right? The relationship they have with teachers and other staff members depend on how that particular staff member relates to them. So what we want to do is make sure that we show them that in the relationship we have, that we care for them and we acknowledge that we see a problem, which is huge. We have to acknowledge that we see the problem, and then we have to show them that we care. And sometimes we know that a student has a good relationship with a particular staff member or something. In this case, if Taylor wasn't going to talk to me, like Dawn said, we might want to escort them to talk to someone, and that would probably be the mental health counselor right off the bat, the school counselor. But if it's a trusted staff member that we know that they're going to open up to, maybe that would be the route to go as well. In the virtual environments, I think Dawn mentioned a pretty good idea that sometimes you may need to set up some Zoom meetings one-on-one with students that you feel might be at risk. Go that extra step, show them that you care, show them that you are concerned about them, acknowledge that you see something that is bringing some concern to you. Maybe their grades are dropping, maybe their attendance virtually is dropping off the board and they're not showing up, but just let them know that you care. And then talk to them, see if there's anything going on. Okay. So it's always important to report any concerns about a student to the counselor and administrator in a timely manner. People don't always read their email right away. So if you know you have a student that is struggling, and they're struggling right now, and they're talking in the conversation like we just had with Taylor, you would want to walk them down and see if you can get them to talk to someone. And if they won't, then you need to let the administrators and things know. Don't just send an email. Sometimes people don't read their email right away. You need to make that phone call or get them to come to your room and let them know that something's going on right away. But you don't want to leave that student alone. You want to stay with them and make sure that they're safe until they can get the help. So if the student's in immediate danger to themselves or to others during the school hours, contact the counselor and administrator at once. Do not delay. And again, not just by email. If the student is in immediate danger to themselves or to others outside of school hours, you want to call the police immediately. Have them do a wellness check. Just dial 911 and say, hey, I've got a student that I believe is in crisis. Can you do a wellness check and just make sure they're okay? Do that first. And when you're finished with that, hang up the phone, call an administrator, and email them both. I mean, just keep a record of what your steps are. I called 911. I contacted administration. I tried to call them. I emailed them. And I think the most important thing to remember, though, is call 911 to do a wellness check right away. If the student is in immediate danger to themselves, after you do the wellness check, when they come back to school, another step that you want to make too, and the administrators will help you remember this, is with the school counselors and everything, you want to make sure that whoever that trusted adult is at school, the student is keeping a communication with them as well. And remember that not everyone sees email immediately again, so they can't always respond quickly. So always report it immediately to the authorities if that's the necessary step. Okay, you don't need to be an expert in this, and I don't think most people feel like they are experts. I know I've had several family members over the course of the years that have committed suicide. I've been trained in it, but still when you're in that situation, every case is so unique. It's very difficult to feel like you have a grasp on exactly what you want to do. You're under a lot of pressure to make sure that you want to say the right thing, do the right thing, and help this student. But you don't have to be an expert, and you don't have to have all the answers. The one thing that we know is students want to know that you care. They just want to know that someone out there values them and makes them feel a little bit more important. So give yourself permission to be human, to feel the emotions. When I come in across a situation, I have to keep in check my own personal experiences with family members when I'm dealing with them. So it's important to remember, if it's happened in your family or something, you're going to have reactions too. And when you finish talking with this student as a staff member, you may need to seek help yourself, or even if it's just a conversation with a friend and say, hey, that really kind of upset me. It's common to feel uncomfortable. So talk to a supportive person beforehand and debrief afterwards. For me, if I feel like that I am going to get into a situation that's tough, or if I feel like I'm going to need to debrief afterwards, I've got Dawn to go to, I've got Marissa to go to if I need to, and I've got members in each of the school buildings too that I feel like I could go to if I'm struggling. So make sure that you have a supportive person. And most importantly, never keep what you learn from a student secret. If they're in an immediate threat to themselves or to someone else, you can't tell that student, hey, it's okay, I won't say anything. You have to let them know, I have to report this, I have to keep you safe, I care about you that much, and just make that a part of it. Currently, this is an important slide, so I just want to walk through it, and you can read this along with me, but we've been talking to administration here, and this is kind of a current school policy, and it's going to reveal a little bit of what we just said about making sure that you do wellness checks and things like that. But this is the current school policy. It's just important to note that time is of the essence. And again, it goes back to the email. We're afraid sometimes that an email is not going to get read in time. So we want to make sure that you know that it's reported appropriately, that there's a phone call, that you walk a student down in person, whatever it takes, but that it's reported immediately. So you're always expected to follow these procedures. If a student comes to you in crisis, acknowledge what the student is sharing with you and show the student that you care by being a good listener, and then asking them the appropriate questions like we were just using in the examples. And then work with the student to help them understand that it's your job to tell the appropriate people. And a lot of times that's where you kind of get the students to start saying, don't tell anyone and all this, and you have to remind them that it's necessary for you to tell them because you care about them. Walk the student to the school counselor personally. If the school counselor is not available, then the administrator that's in the school building should be sought next. If you're unable to leave the classroom, then call them and ask them to come to your room. And otherwise, if there's no one up there, they'll assign another otherwise approved person. The student should be accompanied at all times for safety. There have been incidences reported in some other schools that I've worked at in the past where the teacher will leave for a second to go get a teacher or someone to come back in and talk to that student, and in the absence, the student went to the restroom. While they were in the restroom, they attempted suicide. So you don't want to leave the student alone, because just being under the pressure of that moment may lead them to do something very impulsive. And so you want to make sure that you stay with them once they acknowledge that there's a problem. The school counselor will work with students to identify next steps, such as should we notify parents, possibly request a wellness check or a mobile assessment, especially in this virtual or learning experience, or some other appropriate response agreed upon by parents. If you are made aware that a student is in crisis, but that student has not come to you, but you've been made aware of it. If another student informs you, then this could be made by means of an email, a text, social media, or any other modes of delivery, the student themselves or otherwise that they have notified you that a student is in crisis. The first thing you want to do is call the parent and notify them immediately, at least make that attempt and let them know that something's going on. In the event that you do not have access to the parent or the guardian immediately, then you want to immediately call 911 and ask them to do the wellness check and make sure that everything's going to be okay there. Provide them with any details that you already know. And then after the immediate safety of the student's been dealt with, make sure that your school counselors and administrators are aware of what's happened. Again, a lot of that is so that we know when that student comes back to us, we're aware of what was going on, and we can check in and make sure that the student's okay. And plus, the school counselors and any members of the school staff maybe that have a close relationship with this student, they're probably going to want to reach out while that student's at home every once in a while, even if it's just talking to the parents, but just checking on the student, letting that student know that we care and that we're checking on them, and we want to know that they're safe as well. Okay. So some of the best practices for keeping students safe is just what you'll see here. And we've already talked about them, never leave the student alone. Take a student to the school counselor, walk them down personally. Don't leave them alone, or don't ask them to go down to the office themselves. And provide any additional information to help the assessment process as you can. No matter what each individual school policies are, these are basic steps. Every school should have these steps in place, basically. And then just to make sure that understanding your role in prevention suicide, reach out to the student if you're concerned. If there's any question, if you see a change in behavior in the classroom, if you see a student that their behavior's changed, if they're becoming more withdrawn, more agitated, you just see their grades dropping, anything like that, just talk to them and let them know that you're concerned. Sometimes that gets the conversation flowing, and you find out the student might actually be in more distress than what maybe even you initially thought that the student was in. Connect to the students, to the school counselors, the mental health staff, or the school administrator. Make sure that if they need that support, that they get that support. And then continue to check in, show the student that you care. Continue to check in, stay in touch with the school counselors, the mental health administrators, passing on any new information that you gain as you talk to them. Because if you stay in touch with the students, they're going to let you know how they're feeling, how they've been doing. Just share that information with the people that are going to be talking to them, so they're constantly up to date on the situation that they're solving. Okay.
We're just going to wrap up a little bit. There's only a few more slides left. I want to look at kind of this SOS program, kind of our intentions moving forward. So the SOS Signs of Suicide program is a universal program that teaches all students what to do if they are concerned about themselves or a friend. The biggest thing is pairing what you've learned today, which is the acronym ACT, and then also making sure that our students are aware of it as well. That way we're all using the same language and also the same processes. If they have the same process from teacher to teacher and the same verbiage, that's going to be helpful for both staff and for students. And also for them to know that it's okay that if they have concerns about a friend, that they should speak up and to acknowledge, to care, and to tell. Also, we want to make sure that we're looking at how we're implementing the Signs of Suicide program to students. It is age-appropriate videos. The videos are really storytelling on students who are having significant difficulty. For example, in one video, there is a girl who's kind of feeling worthless. She doesn't really feel like she's going to be able to have her hopes and dreams, and her friend pretty much looks at her and says, "Do you think you're the only one without problems? Like, I'm not perfect." You might think that, so let's go talk to a counselor. I think you really need to talk to someone. You're scaring me by what you're saying. So there are little vignettes like that the students are going to watch to really show them, how do you talk to a friend if you're concerned. It's not taking and betraying their trust by telling a trusted adult that you're concerned about them. It's important that they understand that they are a part of this too, that they can speak up for a friend. If it's a friend, if it's someone they've heard about, even if it's something they saw on social media, it's really important for them to come forward and to tell a trusted adult. Also, we want to really make sure that we're having an opportunity to let students who need to talk to someone be able to do so that day. And really, the acronym ACT encourages those help-seeking behaviors, and that also gives us an opportunity to connect them with appropriate mental health staff, whether it's within the community or within our school building. You guys do a fantastic job of reaching out to students. Teaching isn't what it used to be 20 years ago. Things are much different. Even in the past year, things look differently. We have a lot on our own plates as people, and that's something that we have to remember about. Something that Terry mentioned is we're human. So we have our own risk factors. We have our own things that we're dealing with, or struggles. We have to be mindful of that as well, and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves too. Not only are we looking out for the students that we serve and make sure that we're having safe, protective environments but we want to make sure that we're looking out for each other. So if you see a staff member struggling, it's okay to look at them and say, "I see you struggling. How can I help?" That's really important for us, I think, to take away too. All right, so here is our plan for SOS. So really this summer, we're going to be doing a training refresher. So when you guys come back, we'll be doing a refresher very similar to this, just so that way it prepares us for when students come in. In August, really, we're going to begin implementation. We're going to do presentations in classrooms and small groups. Don't be scared when it says led by teachers. Their videos will also have staff in your classrooms with you to help facilitate those conversations, so you won't be left alone, I promise. But really, those kids see you, they trust you, they know your faces. So it's really important to be done in smaller sizes. We've even talked about possibly doing that in the mentor program if we have that back next year. So it may look a little different than what it's up here, but we're going to try our best to do it in smaller classrooms and smaller sizes. Also, our phase 2 is kind of complete that student training. So over 2 months, we would want to have all students trained with the SOS program and the acronym ACT. Then in October, we're going to be gathering that data and really begin organizing the metrics. So how many students came forward saying that they needed to talk to someone? What types of barriers do we see in our school system? What types of things do we need to put in place? What kind of policies or procedures do we still need? We're going to be collecting that data, and then our SOS team is going to look at those metrics and then also student needs, so that way we can make some more action plans. In November, we're really going to take that feedback and really discuss what those next steps are in a timeline. And then in December, really finalize those needs and a plan for 2022, and then reevaluate that plan and really establish some solid timelines. So it is a process that we're going to be going through. I think the biggest takeaway for you is that we are going to be kind of retraining and doing a refresher when school starts back, and then we'll be implementing the student portion of it. The student portion of it, of course, will be, again, supported within classrooms or done within the mentor program, and then given to all students so they also know what the acronym means, and also all of the warning signs, risk factors, as well as protective factors for them. Another large takeaway, I know when we're talking about the SOS program and with our students, really are these three, and Dr. Berger touched on those as well. Really, our goals as educators is really providing safe environments for students to learn. And a large part about the SOS program is teaching students how to ask for help. I know for me, that's really hard. It's hard for me to ask for help. And it's hard, I'm sure, for a lot of people to do that, especially young people. They have difficulty expressing their emotions, understanding their own emotions. So it's going to be hard for them to also reach out and ask for help as well. So really building those protective factors in our students is extremely important. Building relationships is very, very important. And even monitoring the relationships they have with peers is very, very impactful. And then keeping an eye out for students who are struggling and step in, really acknowledging, telling them that you care, and telling. And that can just be, it doesn't have to be a student immediately in crisis. Even if you see a student who is, when we talked about if they are telling you different things, if they are showing you different feelings, or if their behaviors are changing, those are things we still need to say, hey, you know what? I think we need to go down and see the counselor. I think the counselor and you guys need to have a chat. Those things are okay. That way the student understands that you care about them. Also understanding the school policy for helping a student in need. You saw the school policy. I think the biggest takeaways there is just making sure that you have that communication open with your counselors and administrators. Again, not everyone checks their email if it's a holiday. So if you find out information on a student during a holiday and we're not physically here, it's okay to call and say, hey, I just heard this from my student or the student's friend. I think that we need to do a wellness check. It's okay to call the appropriate authorities and then contact your administrators. Time sometimes is of the essence. If it's something that's not a crisis situation, it's okay still to immediately reach out and make sure that the appropriate individuals have that information. Again, I want to thank everybody for their time. I know that you have an immense responsibility to not just teach algebra and trigonometry and English and science and social studies, but really this past year, I think, has put an even larger spotlight on mental health and access to help. And that's where the school becomes a very large solace for a lot of our students. It's their safe place, a place where they can come and feel accepted. And you guys do a great job at that. So I really want to commend you for the job well done, because I hear a lot of students who feel connected here at Silver Creek, and they feel like they have a base of friends and teachers that love them and care for them. This is just educating them further on how to ask for help. Again, sometimes that is difficult. Does anyone have any questions or anything who is physically here? Anyone who's watching in the live stream or who watches this at a later time, again, if you have any concerns, any questions, whether it be with a student and you don't know how to handle a situation, if it is on the Signs of Suicide program, or anything that has to do with mental health or how to connect to a student, please do not hesitate to take and reach out an email to any three of us. There's also a few things that are, thank you, Marissa, that you have attached to this presentation as well. There is an infographic from the Signs of Suicide program, and it actually articulates out the ACT acronym, and it's important to see if a student is showing any of those concerns. So if you need a refresher, that infographic is there. There's also a handout on ACT in person or from a distance that talks about frequently asked questions as well as warning signs that you can take and look at. And then Ms. Hancock also put together for you guys a mental health resources list of local area mental health providers as well as hospitals. So these are not just for your students, but for you too. So if you are even struggling or know someone, you have access to some resources to be able to share this with parents, with a colleague, or with a friend. It could be a neighbor or anyone. You guys have access to some of those resources. But again, I want you just to kind of leave with this. I used to have a neighbor, and it was an elderly neighbor who used to visit me a lot when I was a little girl. She would take and walk up our driveway. She lived across the street. And it reminds me of what I want to be for others. She would just check in with me. And I came from a house with, two parents who were married and treated me well. but she always came and checked on me, and I felt very connected to her because she would bring me candy or cook me cookies, but she would just ask me how I was doing. And she was someone I trusted. And I can remember having some difficulty with a friend once. And even though I loved my mom, I had a great relationship with her, she was someone I trusted and I could talk to and always made me feel better. So I want to be that for other students too. So when you see a student who maybe is needing a little extra care, or even if you have that gut feeling, trust your gut. To take away today, again, is that you guys are doing a great job. Reach out if you need assistance. If you don't know, I would rather you ask than not ask. And then really remember that acronym ACT. And if you have any questions going forward or need any advice with a student, please do not hesitate to also reach out to any three of us here, and we'd be more than welcome to assist you. I hope you guys have a great afternoon, and thank you again.